I don't want to be one of those people who doesn't know victory and who doesn't know defeat, because I never put myself in a position to know either. Welcome back to the Midweek Modern Craftsman. I apologize for no midweek last week, for no main podcast last week. As fate may have it, we're both out in Cleveland recording some content. I was working, so I work with Fine Homebuilding, who works with Loctite, who works with Habitat for Humanity, and I've been out more than a few times the past couple of years, and I was out for my second trip this year. They needed somebody to come film some content on a separate site than I was at, and they asked if Nick would be interested, so I reached out to Nick. We were both out in Cleveland last week on Tuesday, so it didn't work out, but we're back full steam ahead this week on the main podcast, which we are putting a lot of effort into YouTube. So if you want to check it on YouTube, the one nice thing about on YouTube is if you have a episode specific question, you can leave your question there. Dave, who is editing all of these podcasts, is actually providing us with the questions so that we can respond and get back to you appropriately. So keep the questions coming. Check out the podcast on YouTube. But this week's midweek, I want to dive into a quote. One of my favorite quotes. I feel like I'm getting very nostalgic the past few weeks. Growing up, I had mentioned that I wrestled growing up, and the youth program practiced in the high school wrestling gym. So this quote was on the walls from the time I was in third, fourth grade until I was a senior in high school. Don't know if it's still there or not, but it always stood out to me. And it still holds a lot of weight for me today. A little bit different than what it did back then, just life and perspective and everything else. But I want to dig into this quote a little bit, and maybe you've heard it before, but it is by Teddy. I'm going to call him Teddy from now on. Teddy Roosevelt. He said, "Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat." So that is one of my favorite quotes of all time. And I remember as a young kid seeing that and reading that, and it just being so powerful. And obviously it's not written in the same type of language that we can today, but being in what is Tilly's grade now, she's in fourth grade, so 9 years old, and seeing that quote and having that mean something to me, and having a child now who's 9, I understand the impact of this quote on my life. And it has always resonated so deeply with me. So a little bit of background on this, because I never really looked up the backstory on this. So Teddy Roosevelt was the 26th president of the United States from 1901 to 1909. And this line comes from a speech that was titled "The Strenuous Life." And it was delivered in Chicago on April 10th, 1899. I always had this impression, right, that the struggles of life they're obviously different now than they were back then, but life can seem very strenuous at times. Perspective is different. The times are different. But this speech, "The Strenuous Life," I think can be applied to today just as much as it was in 1899. But the big message here, and the one that I've always taken away from it, excuse me, is that Roosevelt believed that fully embracing the effort, the risk, the struggle is what it takes to live a full life. And I've always felt that I've wanted to live a full life, and I've always wanted to do my best, but a lot of times that's been hindered or hampered by the fear of failure, by the risk that comes along with that, by not meeting my expectations, by not living up to my expectations. And this quote was proof and affirmation that it doesn't really matter if you fail or if you succeed. It's bound to happen, right? You're not going to win everything. You're not going to have every aspect of your life be successful. But to allow fear to prevent you or hamper you from doing the things that you may want to do or trying to reach your full potential is not where you want to be as a human being. That's going to lead to a life of regret. And at the end of the day, I think that most of the successful people that I know in my life, most of the highly successful individuals that I've read about, that I've learned about, have led their life from the perspective of not wanting to have regrets, right? When they're laying on their deathbed, they don't want to have regrets that they should have done more, that they could have done more, that they had more potential, that they could have spent more time with their children, that they could have impacted the world differently. So they approach their life on a daily basis from this aspect and this mentality of, I would rather try and fail than to wonder what could have been. And that's something that I always struggle with. And I think why this sentiment and this quote meant so much to me, because I can count so many times in my life and in business that I haven't done something for fear of failure. And this is something that we discussed on the podcast not that long ago with Nick. And whether it was with my wrestling career, whether it's with the racing that I do now, whether it's with my business, with friendships, with interviewing when I got done college, there were so many times that I wouldn't put myself in the position to reach my full potential because I was afraid that the answer would be no, or that I would be rejected, or that I wouldn't make the team. So, like Nick said on our most recent podcast, the easiest thing is to shy away from that, to say no. But that, what Teddy Roosevelt's saying here is that that's just not a life to live. That's not going to provide you with a fruitful lifestyle. That's not going to ensure that you fulfill as much as you can in your life. And a great fear that I have is that I'm going to look back on my life and say, I didn't do enough. I didn't do as much as I wanted to. I wasn't as successful as I wanted to. I should have done more of this. I should have done more of that. And I think that if I approach my life from the mentality and the perspective that I'm not afraid to try things, that I'm not afraid of failure, that I'm not going to shy away from something because of failure, that I won't have those regrets. And that's really important to me. And that's really important to set an example for my children and to build a lifestyle around that mindset. So let's break down this quote a little bit more, right? How it makes me feel. I think when I initially heard this quote, it was with regard to practice and struggling and cutting weight and being tired and wanting to take the easy way out. Maybe you don't push for the last lap. Maybe you don't push for the last mile. Maybe you look to cheat the workout a little bit. And looking up and seeing this always made me want to try harder, to put myself in the position to fail, right? Where you have a big tournament coming up, you have a big competition coming up, you have a match with somebody who you've battled with, and the doubt starts to creep in, the anxiety starts to creep in, and to look up and to see this and to understand that life is not about safe choices. Life is about putting yourself out there. Life is about taking risks and ensuring that you actually dare. You dare to try new things. You dare to put yourself in a position where you could potentially fail. And I think that that's where the real magic happens. That's where the magic has happened in my life, when I've gotten out of my own comfort zone, when I've done something that I've been afraid to. And yeah, there's been failure with that. But when I look back on my life and I look back on the growth that I've had, so much of the growth has come from that failure, the failure of putting myself out there and trying something. That's when I've realized that I wanted to get better. If I took on a job that felt that it was outside of my capacity and I was afraid, and I did that job anyway, even if it didn't turn out exactly how I wanted, even if it created a lot of stress for me and I lost money on that project, at the end of the day, the self-growth was immense. Not only did I feel that I failed, but I wanted to know how I failed. I wanted to know why I failed. And then I wanted to know what I had to do to prevent failing ever again in that capacity. If that job that I was afraid of, that I took, or that I put myself out there and I sold, was successful, it was a massive boost to my confidence and to my self-esteem. So I was ready to take the next step, move to the next level. And I've had all types of experiences like this in my life. I've had all types of jobs in my life. And I never really regretted taking the job that I wasn't fully equipped for. Sure, there's things I could have done differently. I didn't feel I was taking advantage of my customers. I lived to tell the story. But when I do regret a project, it's the one that I passed on or the one that somebody else was bidding on that I didn't feel I quite matched up with, or that I was afraid if I went through the whole process, the client would hire the other person. So I shied away from it. I told them I didn't have room in my schedule, that it's not a fit for me. And I think that I somewhat gaslighted the situation to put it on, hey, it's your program, your agenda doesn't fit mine. So I'm going to walk here. And that's when I typically had most regrets, and when I've had most regrets in my life. And I know that I spoke about this recently, but that was how I felt with the knee injury that I have that I had, and the end of what I would consider the end of my wrestling career. And it was that I had an out. I had something to lean on. I had a crutch. I had something that I could gaslight into being the reason for me not fulfilling my or exceeding my potential. And I rode with that. And that's where I struggle the most. In this quote, it says to dare mighty things. And what does that mean? And it doesn't have to be this massive, grandiose idea of mighty things, right? But there's certain decisions that we make that may create anxiety or fear for us, whether it's financial, whether it's emotional, whether it's that we just don't feel we have the skill set, that we don't have the repertoire, that we don't have the backlog of work to support what we're doing. Mighty things to everyone, it's all relative. It's all about perspective. So there's times early in my career where somebody got a hold of me and I found out that somebody else was looking at the job, and I was afraid that they weren't going to hire me, that it was going to be a smack in the face, that it was going to be rejected. So I walked away from that job without ever giving it a chance, without ever really putting myself in an uncomfortable position to succeed or fail. And I think that stunted my growth a lot. I've done that, and I'm sure that everyone's done that throughout life. I've done that with friendships. I've done that with relationships. I still do that at times with relationships, with kids, with dirt bike races, whatever it may be. I am able to curate life to create the highest opportunity for success. And I think that that's gotten me by in many ways, but it's also probably stunted my growth in other ways. I like to live a more conservative life and protect myself. So that's why I try and lean back on this quote as much as possible and really dare myself to do things that are uncomfortable for me. And that could be as easy as having a conversation with somebody, talking to somebody next to me on the plane back from Cleveland where it makes me uncomfortable, and having a conversation with somebody flying out to Cleveland and getting on film, working with all of the people there, going out to dinner with people that I don't know. There's all of these things that may not seem as substantial as what Teddy Roosevelt was referring to, but when you add them up over time, when you add them up throughout your life, they really cumulatively can add to your self-esteem. They can add to your confidence. And again, if they don't go well, I'm the type of person that learns from it, that learns why, and then ensures that it doesn't happen again. So it's so important for me and my personality to consistently push myself to do more, whether it is going for a run during the week, whether it is trying to get one more thing off of my to-do list, whether it is speaking to that stranger, whether it's signing up to present at an industry show. All of these things, they don't necessarily come naturally to me. They at times aren't the most enjoyable. But what happens if I don't do them, right? I'm speaking at the Fine Homebuilding Summit in a few weeks, and going and meeting all of these new people and strangers and flying up to Boston and then presenting in front of a bunch of strangers. That's not necessarily the most comfortable thing to me. And I could shy away from that, and I could say no, and I could pass. Thanks, but no thanks. This just doesn't fit with my schedule right now. But I understand that the potential growth that comes from this experience, whether in the grand scheme of things I fail or I succeed, makes me a much better, more well-rounded, dynamic person. And I don't want to look back next year and say, well, what would have happened? What could have happened had I done this? And I approach my life a lot of times that way. And it could be with the simplest things in life, or it could be with more substantial things. I just try to get outside of my own skin and understand that I don't want to lead a life or look back on a life and feel that I had more to give, that I had more potential, that I didn't fulfill everything that I had for myself. When Rachel and I were moving out of our first house into our second house, we had Selby. She had just had Tilly, and we realized we needed a new house. We needed a new car. There wasn't a ton on the market. We had sold our house. We needed to be out of our house, and we ended up in purchasing the house that we have now. And at the time, it was so scary for us. It was more money than what I felt we could really afford, but we had just had our second child. I think I was 30 at this point. Life was overwhelming. I didn't have the business dial, but I knew that this is what we needed. I knew that long term this would pay off. The house had a shop on it. The house had property, had another barn. It was an older house. There was so much opportunity here, but I didn't know how to make it work financially. At that point in our life, there was a lot on the table. We had 2 young kids. We were early in our careers, and I wanted to say no. I wanted to stay in the house that we were in. I didn't want to put more on my plate. I didn't want to be house poor. I didn't know how I was going to make that happen, but I started putting one foot in front of the other, and I decided we're going to make this happen. Regardless, this is what we need. This is going to be a great stepping stone for our future. And we struggled. We put our heads down. We did what we needed to do. We devoted a ton of our lives to making this work. And it's a huge reason why we both are where we are. It's a huge aspect of our life. It's a huge aspect of my business. It presented so many opportunities for us. And now I can't really see it any different, but it's one example in my life where I was so afraid of what the future held. I was so afraid of how I was going to make it work. I was so afraid that we were going to position ourselves and our family in a way that it wasn't conducive for success, that it would create too much struggle for us. And it did for a little while until we got our bearings about us and we figured out how to afford life and how to make more money. And I can't imagine it any other way at this point. But back then I can recall just wanting to give up and not wanting to do it and wanting to remain comfortable and stay where we are. And it wouldn't have worked. And we did. We stepped up to the challenge. We went above what we were approved for and we made it work. And it's all good now, but I can recall the fear and the anxiety that produced. But I stepped outside of that. We stepped outside of that and we made it happen. And to me, these type of risks are when you have the real wins in life. And there's no way of measuring the impact on you, the impact on your mindset, on your career beforehand, because it affects you in so many different ways. It gave me an opportunity to grow my business. It gave me an opportunity to invest in my future. It gave us an opportunity to raise a family here. It allowed so much for us, and that could have easily been overshadowed by the fear, the uncertainty, and not having answers for how we were going to make this happen at the age that we did. When we made it happen, when we settled in, when we went through a lot of the struggles that we did and we came out ahead and we figured out how to make this work, we were so much better as human beings. We were so much better as parents, as business men and women. We were stronger. We were more confident. We understood that the constraints and the limits that we put on ourselves and that other people had told us we weren't bound by that. And this is just one experience in my life. And I'm sure that you guys and you girls can attest to a million times that this has happened in your life. And for me, this is just one that comes to top of mind that I feel is relatable for a lot of people. It's the same as having children, right? Where you never feel that you're ready to have children. And when I was 27, we had Selby, and when I was 30, we had Tilly, and I didn't know how we were going to make it happen. My wife didn't know how we were going to make it happen, but you do. It's scary, but you do. And you show up for life, and you continue to put yourself in these positions that you're uncomfortable, and that breeds growth. And it's not that we're doing anything extremely radical, but I don't want to be the type of person. I want to lead an educated life. I want to lead a calculated life. I want to ensure that the decisions that I'm making aren't going to impact me or my family in a negative way, but I also don't want to be so conservative that I don't reach my full potential and that I don't live my life to the fullest. And I think that that's the big difference between a lot of people who are, and this is not with regard to me, but a lot of people that I've read about, that I've learned about, who are extremely successful versus people who have a successful life. The people who create these businesses, these companies that reinvent whatever industry they are in, they are working under a different set of risks. They are willing to put it all out on the table. They are willing to, for years and years and years, struggle to be successful because they have a vision of where they want to be. And they're not going to allow failure. They're not going to allow emotion. They're not going to allow fear to creep in and prevent them from seeing their vision come to reality. And that's not to say that they don't have setbacks. That's not to say that things go according to plan. That's not to say that they don't fail multiple times over and over and over, but they continue to get up. They continue to keep the big vision in mind, and they continue to understand that if they want to be triumphant, if they want to grow, if they want to be the best version of themselves, they have to live on that threshold of what's absolutely ludicrous and calculated at the same time. You have to expose yourself to these risks in order to be extremely successful. If you sit back and you go through the motion and you just live a complacent lifestyle, you may get there, but it might just be by happenstance. And that's not to say that anything's wrong with that, but that's just not the type of life that I wanted to lead. Relating this back to that quote and relying on that quote, I don't want to be one of those people who doesn't know victory and who doesn't know defeat, because I never put myself in a position to know either. And I'd rather live a life that's marred by victory and or marred by failure and experiences victory and has the highs and lows than to just live a life where I don't know either of them because I'm afraid to try anything, because I'm afraid to go outside of my comfort zone, because I'm afraid to risk anything simply because it's scary, simply because I don't have the answers and I don't know how to do it. And I don't have the self-confidence to put myself out there. I don't have the confidence to be able to fail and live with that. And that's something that has always been really tough for me, and why I think this quote means so much to me. Not every risk that I've taken has paid off. Not everything that I've done has been a success. There's been things that have been failures. There's been things that have been huge failures. There's been relationships, business ideas, jobs, friendships that have failed, but not a single one of them do I look back and say, I wish I wouldn't have tried. I wish I would have never done that in the first place, because there's always been something good to come out of it. I was listening to the Founders podcast on Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, which was recommended to me by a guy online. So thank you. It's typical of most people in these positions who are highly successful and have these businesses. But when they get to the point in their journey that they're absolutely crippled by something that most people would view as failure, as rock bottom, as a reason to shut the lights off and close the door and go back to their normal life and quit chasing their dreams. These are typically the turning points in people's lives that have the biggest impact. So everything that you're afraid of, this failure, having the lights shut off, losing the contract, as with what happened with Phil Knight, turned out to be the single greatest thing that's ever happened to them. And you hear this happen with people a lot, right? They lose their job, and what's absolutely devastating or crushing winds up being the single-handed best thing that's ever happened to them in their life, because they did things the way they wanted to do things. It changed their trajectory. It changed their direction, and it was the catalyst for their new career, for their new business, for the company that everyone knows and loves today. And I think a lot of times we do not position ourselves to be able to even come close to experiencing that, because we are so fearful of what might happen. There's been many things in my life that I've failed that haven't gone according to plan, and they had the biggest impact on my life or on how I do things, right? You sign up for a race, you get smoked, you realize I don't stack up to where I need to be. I'm not in shape. I need to make a change. You begin to train more. You begin to practice more. You begin to do the things that's needed to elevate your game or your craft. You have a client experience where the client is terrible. They don't like your process. They tear your company apart. They bash you. And you could look at this as the worst experience ever. You should have never taken this job. Or you can use it as critical feedback to changing the way that you operate. And it could be the single-handed most important experience that your business has for success, because you realize that, yeah, this person wasn't nice, but there's some validity to what they're saying, and you can make a lot of changes because of that. So we can't allow these failures, these potential risks, to impede our progress, to impede who we are, who we want to be, where we want to go in life and in business. I can deal with the failure. I think once the failure happens, it's just like anything else. You're either going to get up or you're going to lay on the ground. And I've never been one to lay on the ground. I struggle more with the potential failure prior to the event, prior to whatever I'm struggling with, right? If I have a job coming up that I'm feeling anxiety about, or a task that has to be done, or an interview, or I'm flying to Cleveland to film something, or I have a race coming up, whatever it may be, I can ruminate on that to the point of severe anxiety. And when I think about what's the worst thing that could happen, I can typically cope with that. If I were to engage in whatever activity was creating all of this anxiety and I failed, I'm okay with that. It's just beforehand that I let the self-doubt creep in to where it almost prevents me from doing that in the first place. Once I engage, once I take the first step, I'm a fighter. I'm going to get it done. It's just beforehand. And that's all in my head. And I've realized that. And that's something that for 39 years now, I've needed to work with. And I still don't have it licked. I'm still not a professional. I still can't look everything in the face and say, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. I don't care what happens. I still don't have as thick of skin as I would like, but it's gotten thicker, and I've gotten stronger, and I've gotten better, and I'm taking more chances, and I'm taking more risks because I understand the flip side of the coin and how much good can come out of it. We all want to experience victory, but I would rather know defeat. I would rather fail than not take a shot in the first place. And the reason being is that I've experienced both. I've experienced failure in life. I've experienced failure in business. I've experienced failure in athletic. And when I put the effort in and I failed, I can handle that. But when I failed because I didn't put the effort in, because I was 50% there, when I bailed before it even began, when I walked away from an experience, when I walked away from an opportunity, that has had such a more devastational impact on my life long term than anything else. Walking away from something because I feared it or because it gave me anxiety before I ever gave myself an opportunity to see how I stacked up has affected me so much more heavily and negatively than the actual failure. So I think that's why this quote stuck out to me so much as a young kid, because even at 9 years old, being anxious, being afraid of potentially what could happen, that I could lose a wrestling match, that I could be so exhausted that it was going to physically hurt to run another lap, that the kid I was wrestling was bigger, stronger, had more experience than me. All of those things were intimidating. They were scary, but I had to keep sight of the fact that they weren't as scary or as intimidating as not knowing, not ever having the answers for myself, not ever putting myself in a position to truly test who I was and what could come out of that. Again, because the failure is not the difficult part. It's the anxiety and the mental self-doubt leading up to it. And that quote, while it has a different meaning in my life now, it has a lot of similarities. It has the same sentiment. Still at 39, there's still 30 years later, there's still a lot of things that I can take away from that, a lot of struggles that I have, a lot of risks that I'm not willing to take because of fear, because of anxiety, because of guilt. And I still can lean on that heavily to ensure that I am putting myself in a position to be the best version of myself every day. And it doesn't happen, and it's not perfect, but I can always rely on this to say, I want to be the person who succeeds. But if I don't and I fail, I'm going to be in a better mental space than just walking away from that or running away from that or shying away from that. I want to be the person who puts everything into it, and the result may not matter. The journey may matter more, but at least I went on that journey rather than steering clear of that journey. So that's going to wrap up this week's Midweek Modern Craftsman. Obviously, a super powerful quote by a very successful, driven individual, and something that for 30 years of my life I think about very often, sticks with me very often, and still has a profound impact on my life. And I think it have a profound impact on all of you as well. So again, that quote is, far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. I hope everyone has a great week. Thanks for all the emails. Thanks for all the comments, the questions, the support. Check us out on YouTube. We are spending a lot of time over on YouTube. If you have questions, comment directly. Those questions are getting sent to us, and we can get you some answers as well. So hope everyone enjoyed this. Have a good week. I will catch you next week.